Welcome back to Session 3, the historical context of the earlier rule. The original manuscript of the earlier rule, approved by the Pentecost chapter in 1221, no longer exists. In fact, the earlier rule was always a work in progress until it was officially surpassed by the much shorter later rule in 1223 that received papal approval. As a work in progress, the earlier rule underwent at least 3 significant phases of development, according to the canonical process of becoming a recognized religious order within the medieval Roman Catholic Church. First, in 1209, Francis and his brothers submitted their Propositum Vitae, or their proposal for living the Christian life, to Pope Innocent III, which he approved, thereby recognizing Francis and his companions as a fraternity. Much of the first 17 chapters were likely written during this first stage between 1209 and 1215. Second, the brothers edited their proposal into a forma vitae, or a form of life that elaborates on the Christian life they chose to live. Here the fraternity takes on the name of religio, or religion. This second stage most likely occurred around 1215 because Lateran IV, presided over by Innocent III, forbade the approval of new religious orders. Chapters 18 to 20 reflect the concerns of the council. Likewise, the decision of the General Chapter in 1217 to structure the religion of the Lesser Brothers into provinces is likely an outcome of this intermediate stage of development. Finally, the third stage of development includes chapters 22 and 23, which Francis added to the rule before departing for Egypt in the summer of 1219. Then in 1221, the earlier rule of 1221 is a redacted attempt at creating a rule that canonically governs the religion. However, this does not happen until 2 years later when Pope Honorius III approves the much shorter, more juridical rule of 1223, which makes the new religion a canonically recognized religious order. Hence, what we know as the earlier rule evolved over at least 15 years as Francis and his brothers worked to explain the evangelical life they desired to live. Of course, their context influenced their desires and vision. Francis, his companions, and the earlier rule emerged out of the European, specifically Italian context of the early 1200s. Francis was not the first medieval figure to desire a renewed form of the evangelical life. Other evangelical movements in the late 1100s saw renewed interest in forms of devout Christian life. This focus on renewal was a response to the dramatic changes in the economic, social, political, and ecclesial structures of the time. First, the late 1100s into the 1200s witnessed great economic change. For example, the initial decline of feudalism, especially in France, where Francis's father did much of his business, and the rise of mercantilism throughout Europe brought with it the rise of coined money as a source of wealth. Of course, economic changes also brought dramatic changes in social organization, which marginalized many of the poor and the powerless who lost their place within feudal society. These economic and social forces influenced the earlier rule. Likewise, there were domestic and international conflicts that changed the political landscape. Locally, Francis himself participated in the civil war between Perugia and Assisi, which was a result of the broader competing powers between the empire of Frederick II and the papacy of Innocent III. Internationally, war waged with the Christian Crusades against the Muslims. Again, politics and the accompanying struggle for power influenced the earlier rule. Finally, the ecclesial reforms brought by the pastoral changes of the Fourth Lateran Council also shaped the concern for Catholicity in the earlier rule. In short, Francis's world, like our own, was quite complex. The earlier rule responds to the world of the early 1200s by describing a gospel life that focuses on the day-to-day relationships that form specific communities and, by extension, society more generally. In this sense, the earlier rule is a document of reform that the brothers believed derived from the teachings and actions of Jesus. To ignore the context of the earlier rule is to miss the gospel vision of the renewal it envisions. Today, Francis of Assisi is one of the best-known Christian figures, yet his popularity often produces a sentimental image of the saint communing with nature. Such characterization makes the gospel life Francis desired to live in community safe. Yet the evangelical life found in the earlier rule is far from safe. Instead, the earlier rule first invites and then challenges the brothers to live the gospel life by overcoming economic, social, political, and ecclesial tendencies that tend to destroy the relationships among God, the giver of all good, neighbor who must be loved and served, and the self who so often, by words and deeds, neglects and/or rejects both God and neighbor. Ultimately, the earlier rule aims at transforming personal and communal relationships that conform to Jesus' teachings and footsteps. That is, his words and deeds of the gospel.